Hey guys, welcome to Truth and Liberty. I'm back for a little bit. I apologize for my hiatus. I apologize that this is probably not going to be the first in a regular series. This is just me checking in on you and just letting you know I'm still alive. So without further ado, I guess we'll get into it. Today I just kind of wanted to take a bit of a pot shot at Jeff Durbin. Jeff Durbin is for those of you who don't know, if you've been living under a rock, he's a Reformed pastor in Arizona. He's connected to Dr. James White, and he's a pretty libertarian guy in many senses, although he's also he's a theonomist, so he's got certain libertarian leanings. He runs that show next week with Jeff Durbin, which was sort of a parody of the Daily Show last week tonight with John Oliver type liberal talk show bits, and he's interviewed Austin Peterson, so he's a friend of the libertarian movement, I would say, but he is not himself a libertarian, I don't think, because he's a theonomist, and so we have a lot of maybe friendly alliance with some of the theonomists in our current context. But the final solution, the final end goal that we want to get to is divergent from them. So I wanted to sort of pot shot at him just for this one comment, not because I want to criticize Jeff Durbin at all. I'm not trying to single him out, but I was listening to this video from his Apologia Studios, and it was a great, edifying video. And before I go on, I have to say, his ministry, Apologia Studios, Apologia Church out in Arizona, they do amazing work. Their apologetics, their preaching, their teaching on worldview issues is out of this world. It's amazing. And I've learned a lot from his ministry, him and Dr. White and Seiton Bruggencate. I've learned a lot from these guys. And so, I mean, this is in no way an attempt to criticize or throw anything down against Jeff Durbin. And really, my comments in this video are really just to point out, I think, what is often a misunderstanding or a confusion about these things. And we'll get into as we talk about. I'll play the part of the video for you, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we get into it. But I guess all that to say, I mean, the video I'm going to play, I'm only going to play a very small portion of this for you. But it's from an interview that he did, and the guy's name is Jamali Maddox. He had him on the show, and he's from Vice. And they had a great conversation. They talked about abortion was the main topic. And it was a really good conversation. Jeff led him through a discussion on why the Christian worldview believes that abortion is murder. They talked about Christian ethics. They talked about how atheism doesn't provide any consistent ethics. And it was a really great conversation. Jamali had some good questions. Jeff did a really good job of answering those questions very ironically and with the biblical worldview. And it was a really edifying. So I want to play this video, and I encourage you to go check it out, actually, and listen to the whole thing. But about the 20-minute mark, they actually touched on the topic of libertarianism very, very briefly. And Jeff made a comment that I think needs to be addressed, because I think he's confused, and I think a lot of people are confused about this, especially a lot of theonomists. And so let's play and listen to and think about what he's going to say here. So,
right, so to cut you off, do you think that it should go down to a democratic vote of? Because if we're going to break it down to state level, say if we're talking about America, we're breaking it down to every state as an individual country, just because it's such a big country.
Mm-hmm, right.
So we're talking about individual states.
That's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you think that each state should vote on the law? So say if Arizona don't want abortion, and everyone's voted and it's got a higher percentage on votes, no more abortion. But then New York State, it overruled that they want to have a legal abortion. Do you think that the government should still get involved in New York if they want legal abortion?
I think that it should go down to states themselves to govern themselves. As a matter of fact, the government system in the United States was built in such a way as to be a republic, right? So the way you described it is perfect, like these almost individual countries in a union. Like what they meant when they said union, they didn't mean what we have today, where it's really a federal government really running everything. They meant this is our thing, right? We're all individual sovereign states, but this is our thing. So I do think the states have the right and responsibility just to say, this is what we're going to do. And I do believe, Jamali, I think that if you, in the United States of America today, I think if you said, put it to a vote, let's let each state vote, I think that you would see abortion banned in virtually every state, except for the known liberal ones, yes.
All right, so I played all that so far. This is just context, a little bit of background here to cover so you can kind of understand where the conversation is going and how we arrive at the point that we're going to get to here. So the big part's going to come here in a second. So basically, this is just Jamali, who's British. He's asking how America works and theorizing how it would work if a anti-federalist view or a states' rights view, kind of the Republican, but I mean, ideally even more anti-federalist view. If America was treated the way the original idea was, where we would have all of these individual countries, a little more like the European Union. That were just loosely federated. How would that work? And he suggests, what if, every state put it to a vote and New York said, we want abortion, should the federal government come in and say, no, you can't have abortion? Which, it's interesting that he asked that question that way. He's kind of making he's playing an interesting move there, strategy. I guess, I don't want to attribute motives to him or anything, but in a rhetoric sense there, that sort of lays a bit of a trap there, because if you say, well, no, we want states' rights, then you're allowing abortion, right? But it's an interesting discussion, or a thought. I'm not going to get into that because that's that's beside the point that I actually want to get to. But anyway, so he asked that question. So Jeff basically says, if you put it to a vote, he believes at least that if you put it to a vote in every state, except for maybe a handful, 2 or 3 of the known liberal states, Massachusetts, New York, California, those are the obvious ones, it would probably be banned in just about every state, which would be better than what we have now. And so that's where we are. And so let's listen now what comes next.
Yeah.
I do believe that.
Are you quite libertarian in your political approach?
Very.
Yeah.
I think that if you took like the law of God and you applied the general equity of it to today and said, let's make our system look like what this is, it would look very libertarian.
Yeah.
It would look very libertarian. So
Jamali asks him, are you libertarian in your views? And Jeff says yes. Now, it's unclear at this point what definition of libertarianism that Jamali has in mind at this point, because that's oftentimes the rub. And anybody asks me, are you libertarian? I have to ask them what they mean. Do you mean the Libertarian Party? Because no, I'm not a libertarian by the Libertarian Party, probably because I don't believe in political action as necessarily the primary strategy for the liberty movement. Also because I hold very little, if any, fellowship with the worldview of the Libertarian Party. And so I'm not a libertarian, and that's not just the foundational biblical level thing. That's like definition of liberty type stuff. What are rights, economics, are we Randian or are we Rothbardian, basic stuff like that. And there's a lot in the Libertarian Party that is very strange and weird, and I don't have any fellowship with. But the truth of the matter is, I am a libertarian. And so Jamali asks Jeff, are you libertarian? Jeff says yes, because of the general equity of the law, which is a pretty close answer to, as a summary goes, as a short answer goes, it's a pretty decent answer, I think. So again, point being, this is not about, taking any sort of pot shots at Jeff and calling his libertarian cred into question or anything like that. That's not the point here. But what I want to get to is what comes next. This is the key issue here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think
Isn't
that
part of like libertarianism as well, like freedom of choice?
in a sense, except libertarianism. This is where libertarianism dies. Well, libertarianism dies because it's got the right ideal of personal freedom and personal responsibility and self-governance, right, and small, limited government. That kind of stuff is like, in principle, it's absolutely right. I think that comes ultimately from Christian worldview to have that kind of idea. However, where libertarianism dies, and it will never get off the ground, is it doesn't have an objective moral standard. Because you can say personal freedom and responsibility all you want, but if you don't have an objective standard of what is actually right and wrong, you're just in a sea of confusion.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where libertarianism will always just fall dead.
Okay, so his comment here, I think, is a very common misunderstanding of what libertarianism is. And it's a really interesting one because there's a sense in which it's true, and there's a sense in which it's false. And it goes back to that question of, what do you mean by libertarian? If you mean Libertarian Party, I think his comments are pretty spot on. You can see the insanity that's going on in the Libertarian Party. They don't have a consistent moral ethic. They don't have a consistent worldview. And so there's all kinds of weirdness going on. So, yeah, there's a sense in which he's right. But the reason why the Libertarian Party is so confused is because they don't have a proper definition of libertarianism. Libertarianism, most properly and most clearly defined, is what you can find written about in Stefan Kinsella's essay, What Libertarianism Is, or in the works of Murray Rothbard, Hans Hermann Hoppe, where we defend the idea of non-aggression and property rights, or the ideas of non-aggression and property rights. That's the bedrock foundation of what libertarianism is. And that is a consistent ethic. That's a consistent moral ethic. Now, what Jeff is confused about is what is often confused a lot of people, and it informed Al Mohler's comments. It's a very common misunderstanding where people expect more from your political philosophy than it's supposed to have. And this is why we get compromised into like neocon worldviews or the conservative political philosophy, where we think that we have to legislate certain things about morality because those things are right and wrong. And we start to get confused about what the role of government is. If you have a proper understanding of what the role of government is, government not necessarily being defined as the state, but as the institution that bears the sword. If you have a proper understanding of what the role is for that sword in society, then you'll understand that there's only a certain limited use. Now, this goes back to our interpretation of Romans 13 and our definition of the wrongdoer in that passage, as we believe it's informed by God's law and the general equity that you find therein. We believe that a wrongdoer in that context is only somebody who is committing aggression or fraud or somehow causing intentional or direct harm to an actual victim. So the sword-bearing magistrate bears the sword in those cases. And if that's the case, then you're not going to expect more from a political philosophy than it is. C.J. Engel, the Reformed Libertarian, was probably the first one who promoted this idea to me, which was that libertarianism is not a complete worldview. It is merely the political philosophy component of a worldview. And from our Reformed worldview, we believe it is the political philosophy that is most consistent with the Reformed worldview, because we have a certain understanding of what the role of government is. And so when you understand what the role of government is, you're not going to expect more from your political philosophy than it's supposed to give you. So why would libertarianism need to have this moral ethic that goes beyond property rights, beyond non-aggression? Why would it need to have more of a moral standard than that? Yes, outside of that, there is a need for moral standards. Absolutely. The holiness of God is the holiness of God, and that is uncompromisable. And God's law is consistent and it's clear, and those things are your moral standard. And so from a Reformed libertarian, we would want to promote those ideas as truth outside of the libertarian political philosophy. But there's no need to inject those things into our political philosophy and say, well, our political philosophy must include those things directly. because then we're asking more of the sword than what is supposed to be asked of the sword. Does that make sense? And so I think Jeff's comments here are a little confused. Now, this might be more of a throwaway comment from him. I think he's trying to transition back into a worldview discussion about abortion. And so this is probably fine, I think. I don't think necessarily that he is all that confused on this, but I know a lot of people are. I know a lot of people, they look at libertarianism and they go, well, that's anarchism. Libertarianism would allow people to, hire prostitutes and would allow people to do drugs and would allow people to blah, 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 this, that, and the other sin. And we go, homosexuality is a common example. And we go, well, yeah, because those things are not crimes. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't preach the gospel to them or tell them what God's law says from a moral standpoint, but we don't believe it's in the role of the magistrate to enforce those things. And so, on its own, yeah, you just take that libertarian property rights and non-aggression, and you put that in an atheist worldview, and you're going to have somebody who is very tolerant of moral depravity and even celebrates and promotes and commits moral depravity. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no way for us to impose that on them directly by saying, well, if you're going to accept our political philosophy, you have to also accept these other things. But that's kind of the point of libertarianism, is that it's wrong to forcefully impose a view on somebody. We would want to persuade them using sound arguments and allowing the Spirit to use His Word to change their hearts. And so we don't really think that it's necessary or important or valid for us to be trying to use our political philosophy to sort of shoehorn the gospel into somebody's life. We see a lot of, I see a lot of that thought in your typical religious right thinking. Well, we gotta enforce Christian morality because that's going to shoehorn Christianity into people's lives. It's not. It's only going to make them more frustrated and more hard-hearted and more angry and despondent and etc. So that's all I got today. I think that Jeff goes on from here, and he does a great job of talking worldviews and everything with Jamali, and it's just a fantastic conversation. So I really encourage you to go check this out. This is you can find it on Apologia Studios. I will put a link to it in the description so you can see it for yourself. It's great. The particular part that I highlighted here is at about the I think it starts at 1909 when Jamali's talking, the first bit I started. So, but I mean, go check it out. Listen to the whole thing. It's a great discussion. Listen to Jeff Durbin's stuff. I mean, I hope I can promote this idea that there's a lot of people out there that we agree with on like 99% of stuff. Even like the Gospel Coalition. There's a lot of the streak in the libertarian movement where they're starting to get leery of the Gospel Coalition because of the little bit of SJW-ness that's coming out of them right now, and I think that's somewhat healthy to a certain extent. I think we should be leery of the SJW-ness that's coming out. We should be a little suspect of that. We should be engaging these things rationally, and that's really good and important. But at the same time, we need to not lose sight of the things that we do actually have in common with them and the unity that we have around the gospel. And the whole point of the Gospel Coalition is the unity around the gospel. And even when we have guys like Jeff Durbin, he's a theonomist, so we wouldn't have a complete unity with him on political philosophy. But given the fact that we're in the society that we're in here in the United States of America, we're like 99% allied with him. And so rather than like fighting against people, let's get on board and be united with people, because I think the ideas he's promoting are great. Just the conclusion where he wants to go to, I think, is a little off. But you know what? That's fine. I would rather have his system than what we got now. And so I think it's important for us to be able to engage in these kinds of discussions and have these conversations and talk about these ideas without feeling as though we're coming to a rift. Because I think we, as Reformed Christians, better than anybody else, have the ability to actually have these sorts of debates while maintaining the common ground of unity that we have in the gospel, because we have a common ground of unity. Out in the world there, if you've got a disagreement with somebody and you can't resolve that disagreement, then what do you do? Because you have no common ground of unity. We have the gospel. And so we are united with Jeff Durbin in worshiping Jesus Christ as Savior And that is like the most important thing above all. And so we could debate. I could disagree with his comments here. I can sort of criticize what he's saying. I can sit here and I'm basically sniping his words, and I understand that. And so I'm not trying to be a goober about that, but I can do that, right? And it's not an attack. It's not a rift. I'm hoping I'm not starting a war with Jeff Durbin. That's not my intent. And I don't feel as though that this will, because we have a more common unity that's more important. And so I really want to see Christians especially really discussing politics. I really want to see Christians discussing politics, because we should be the only ones who can, really. The world, they sling mud at each other. They hurl insults at each other. They call each other Hitler. They call each other fascists. They devolve into this insanity of hatred and mess. Christians, we can discuss politics. We can disagree. We can refine each other's thinking, and we can agree to disagree on things because we have a better, more sure foundation, and we don't have to agree at the end of the day. We don't have to. Politics is not a gospel issue. It's secondary. It really is. I mean, the gospel should inform our politics, absolutely. But having the wrong view of politics doesn't deny the gospel. If you deny the gospel, you'll have the wrong view of politics, obviously. But having the wrong view of politics does not deny the gospel. And so I think we can discuss these things better than anybody else, and I think we should. I want to see Christians being able to engage in these conversations and these topics and disagreeing with each other and sniping each other's words and talking about these things and trying to come to a better agreement and everything. And I'm going to post at some point I did a debate back and forth with one of my friends who's a pastor at my church. And it was a good debate, and we talked about the concept, is taxation theft, and so that ranged a little bit over and everything. And I wanna post some of the arguments that he made and respond a little bit to that, and it's totally in a spirit of let's understand these ideas, and given the fact that we agree on the gospel, we can talk about this and we can agree to disagree on this, and we can still be united. Anyway, I am digressing into a ramble. So that's all I have for today. I wish you guys well. Keep pressing in the liberty movement out there. Keep spreading the truth. Keep preaching the gospel. And we'll pray that God will bring revival to this land, and that ultimately Jesus Christ will be glorified as our Savior. So have a great one.